Вітаю, це медіа-центр.
Good afternoon, this is Media Center, Ukraine, Odessa, and we're starting our working day with a briefing dedicated to human rights in uncontrolled territories. We're having with us Vira Yastrebova, lawyer director of the Східна правозахисна група, Eastern Human Rights Group. Good afternoon. Today, I'd like to tell you about some aspects of human rights violations committed by the Russian Federation on the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Of course, I could not cover all violations today, but I hope that in the future we will have the opportunity, thanks to such a hospitable platform like Media Center Ukraine Odessa, to tell everything. Because I'd like to tell the local population, journalists, international partners to know about the situation in the uncontrolled territories and will be able to get quick updates about the situation, to know how the Russian Federation continues terror against the local population. I'd like to say that their occupation administrations of the Russian Federation, which conduct activities to destroy identity among local residents as well as children and teenagers. Moreover, in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, the invaders started a new stage of forced mobilization among the local population and teenagers who have just turned 18 years old. So, what are the activities of the Russian Federation in the temporarily occupied territories? This is forced issuing of passports in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. The invaders are trying to issue passports of citizens of the Russian Federation to the majority of the local population, our Ukrainian citizens. According to our information of Східна правозахисна група and our partners from the relevant institute, we have found out that there is terror against local population. Local employers who cooperate with the administrations of the Russian Federation are forced to issue passports of the Russian Federation to local population. If the person refuses to get the passport of the citizens of the Russian Federation, it is invited to the law enforcement bodies of the Russian Federation, where this person shall explain in writing about the reasons for the refusals. But why people don't want to get Russian passports? Because they expect the territories to be liberated and for the occupiers to leave our territories. Of course, they don't want to get the passport of the Russian Federation that is a symbol of blood, pain, and war. Now, as for other oppressive measures, these written explanations are scrutinized and they start criminal proceedings against people who refuse to get Russian passports. The Russian Federation also tries to force people to refuse from the Ukrainian citizenship. This means that on the temporarily occupied territories, the occupiers have simplified the procedure of refusal from the Ukrainian citizenship. All they need to do is to apply to the occupiers' migration service. A lot of citizens continue refusing to submit such applications. That's why they use measures to force people to do this, similar to how they make people get Russian passports. They also require written explanations about the reason why they refuse to do this. The main focus of the occupiers are children, teenagers who get passports for the first time. According to our sources, the Kremlin propaganda will continue putting pressure on people for them to refuse from Ukrainian citizenship. This message is untrue because people are forced to refuse from the Ukrainian citizenship. We report accordingly about such cases to bring into focus of the International Criminal Court and the international community to the fact that such actions of the occupiers confirm their activities aimed at the genocide of the Ukrainian people, and we think that propaganda will start information campaigns starting from May of this year. So they forced people to refuse from Ukrainian citizenship to use this to justify their activities on the occupied territories, saying that the most population on the occupied territories are the citizens of the Russian Federation. The next point, strengthening exit and entry control to the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine from the Rostov region. The governor of the Rostov region signed a decree on strengthening control of entry and exit from the Rostov region to the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine. The question, why do they need this? We believe that such actions of the occupiers are aimed at stopping the crossing of the temporarily occupied territories border by deserters from the occupying units of the Russian army, who are traveling away from the front line with weapons. There is also information about border crossings. Men try to preserve their lives, to leave the combat zone, and to return to Russia. I would also like to share today that on the occupied territories, the Russian Federation tries not only to deprive people of their life, citizenship, but there is also alienation of property. The occupiers create regional representative offices of the federal bodies of the occupation authorities in the occupied territories of Ukraine. For example, there are more than 100 divisions of the occupation police, or more than 43 divisions of regional prosecutors' offices. So this is their repressive machine. To ensure work of these occupation bodies, the occupiers attract Russian citizens who move from the territories, who move from the regions and republics of the Russian Federation to the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. These employees are accommodated in apartments and houses that were alienated from citizens of Ukraine who were forced to leave the occupied territories because that was dangerous to be under shelling. In general, it can be noted that the occupiers pursue a policy of resettling people. That is, they deport Ukrainians to remote corners, or to remote areas of the Russian Federation, while Russians, on the contrary, are transported to the occupied territories. Thus, they erase a historical memory. The Russian Federation understands that people who remember their lives in Ukraine, when they had jobs, when they had salaries, which were much bigger than the money provided by Russian administrations. They don't need these people. They need territories. The territory to blackmail the whole civilized world and to make such bloody war a norm. I would also like to say that we have noted the creation of additional divisions of the forces of the occupiers in the temporarily occupied territories. They are very afraid of human rebellion on the occupied territories because at the moment they deport children and deprive locals of parental rights to increase the amount of people they deport to the Russian Federation. Therefore, in order to prevent such rebellion, they constantly increase the number of law enforcement agencies of the corresponding tasks. Recently, in addition to the Russian Guard special units of the Federal Penitentiary Service, special units of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the FSP, the Non-Departmental Security Department of the Russian National Guard, was created. So we can see here terror, law enforcement bodies, and also the attempt to zombify with Russian values. As for medicine, and issues of non-providing medical care on the temporarily occupied territories. According to our sources, in the occupied territories, there are problems with the supply of medicines and drugs which are used to treat chronic diseases. So there are also no medicine for substitution therapy, treatment of diabetes, antibiotics, and painkillers. So these are the medicine which are must-have for people with such diseases. The problem is there is a need for civilians to get access to such medicine. There is the whole network of supply of such medicine in Ukraine. So people could select the medicine they needed. Most medicines brought to the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine are aimed at the military. Local civilians cannot use this medicine to treat themselves. We are mostly concerned about the people with the mentioned diseases because they cannot get medical aid on the occupied territories. The Russian Federation also brings doctors to those territories, but they also provide medical aid to the military there and the regular troops of the Russian Federation. It is very difficult to find relevant doctors because there are no such doctors on those territories. As for additional forced measures, They include first collection of blood, which is carried out through the administrations on the temporarily occupied territories. The occupiers' administrations use administrations of educational institutions to collect blood from children and students. This donor blood is also needed to support the occupiers' troops. So they say that they will use everything for the front line and for their victory. They don't care about the locals. They use locals cynically and cruelly just as a material. So they use force, they use repressions, they use the system of the law enforcement bodies that they have been establishing on the occupied territories. But even under these conditions, our Ukrainians there are waiting and looking forward for our victory and for their territories be liberated, to have access to medical care, to be legally and physically protected, and to have all the values of Ukraine protected. These are not all violations of the human rights there, and not all aspects, but the situation there currently creates challenges for tomorrow. That's why today, I asked this platform, Media Center Ukraine Odessa, to give me an opportunity to speak and to tell you about the situation. Thank you for your attention. If you have questions, I will be more than happy to answer them. Thank you. Thank you, Vera. Dear colleagues, do you have any questions? Michael Vasura, Newsweek Journal. What is the situation on the temporarily occupied territories that had not been occupied before the 25th of February last year, if comparing to Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast that had been occupied before? And I can say that the local population is in shock because we understand that during the first wave of the occupation, most population left the territories in Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast. People who stayed there have been under propaganda influence since 2014. And the propaganda was very active in all areas of lives. As for the territories that have been occupied after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, people are shocked there because of the cruelty they see. And the measures they use are identical. So this is the substitution of the population. This is the establishment of new law enforcement bodies. And so we can see that the situation is similar. Thank you. Before the liberation of the right bank of the Kherson Oblast, the Russian Federation took a lot of locals from there, because actually I know about this because I met the relatives and friends of those people. We can see a similar situation in the temporarily occupied territories of the Zaporizhzhia Oblast and in other areas. Perhaps this means that Russia expects the counteroffensive. Can you confirm this or not? But I believe that they did not leave those territories by themselves. They were forced to leave by our armed forces that do everything possible for us to be victorious and allow us to work despite anything. The deportation is ongoing. And we have presented a separate report that we prepared with the support of the British Embassy about how the Russian Federation zombifies children. And before that, we prepared a report about forced deportation of people. Unfortunately, we can speak the same not also about adults. And Lvova, Belovy, these children ombudsman and Putin received the order that was discussed last Friday. That was the decision of the International Court. And this is also the act of genocide against Ukraine. And unfortunately, in the uncontrolled territories, we cannot protect our people from that genocide. I hope that telling about this situation to the international community, to journalists, will make it possible for the Putin to be prosecuted, for them to stop this campaign. But we should use force and intimidation. We should be united to stop our enemy. This is our common objective. Are there any other questions? Thank you. Thank you for being with us here today. That was Vira Yastrebova, the director of the Skhidna Pravozakhisna Gruppa NGO. And we will meet with you at noon. We'll have briefing of Mr. Brachuk.